Well, Patti, I love this episode. I'm so excited to finally get Accept.Blue on here, a new player in the payment space. I thought it was very insightful.
He's very insightful, and I was really intrigued by the fact that, these guys were created, they launched in 2020. I mean,
what a challenge.
What a challenge. And what an awesome solution they've put together. I mean,
they really have.
If they could put that together in 2020, right. Imagine what they're going to be like in 3 or 4 years.
I know. And I really think that they do fill a niche. I think ISOs and agents have needed a true Stripe competitor for a long time, and that's what I consider them. Mm-hmm. And so I think if you're going after ISVs or level 3 merchants and stuff, it's a very, very interesting interview. And then tell us about the insiders.
James and I have a very candid discussion on cryptocurrency and what's going on in that field in terms of, shall we say, mainstreaming it.
Right. Spoiler alert, I'm not a fan. And so I'm sure many of you will disagree with me. Send me your emails and comments. I welcome your negativity.
Right. So it's and then your question from the field, really interesting dialogue you offered this week, James. Thank you.
Thanks, Patti. Yeah, we talk about barriers. There's so many of these barriers. I talk about, leasing terminals, long-term contracts, price increases where, there's this perception that they're just bad in the industry. And the truth is they can be bad if used incorrectly. But I talk about the idea of building towards your objective and not really closing off options before you decide what your objective is going to be. So
hopefully and not letting your perceptions cloud your judgment, right?
Yes, that's a good way to put it. Absolutely. Yeah. So I think we got a lot of great stuff, Patti. I'm ready to go if you are.
I am. Let's go.
Welcome to the Merchant Sales Podcast.
Hey everybody, Patti and I are here today with the Director of Business Development at Accept.Blue, Ben Frisch. How you doing today, Ben?
Good. Thank you so much, James, for having me.
Absolutely. So
great to have you.
Yeah, I'm excited about this one. I've been wanting to do this interview for a while. I've been following Accept.Blue's progress, and I think it's always exciting as we get new companies in the payment space, especially when we get new companies that are not, eliminating the ISOs and agents that are actually like in partnership with them. And that's certainly the case with Accept.Blue. So the main topic today, other than introducing Accept.Blue to our audience, Ben, is we're going to dive into these recent integrations you've done with Salesforce and Netsuite. Which I know you guys are really excited about. I think it's an amazing opportunity for our audience to target literally tens of thousands of merchants that they otherwise probably would not get. But before we dive into that, Ben, give us a little bit of your background, your journey, and then tell us about Accept.Blue just in broad terms. What is it and what do you guys do?
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much, James and Patti, for having me. I'm really excited about this. I'm really into the content that you guys create. And James, one of the things that I feel like our industry is really missing is education. There's so much out there. There's so much knowledge that ISOs and agents need to have. And besides for you and some other couple of folks out there, there isn't that much education. So I'm a big fan of this this podcast and the content that you create for sure. So let me tell you a little bit about Accept.Blue. So we're a processor agnostic gateway, and when I say processor agnostic, processor is like a word that I sort of feel like everybody has a different definition of. Everybody calls something else processor, right? So we're processor agnostic as far as first data thesis Alabama processors, but we're also processor agnostic as ISO agnostic. That means we work directly with ISOs. We don't work directly with merchants. We service ISOs. That's who our partners are. And we're open to all ISOs as long as they're working with our processors, first data and thesis. So a little bit about Accept.Blue. So we're fairly new. I like to say we're the new kid on the block, but we're the cool new kid on the block. So it's not that big of a problem. So we actually started off, our beginnings were at a software development firm, a small company that was doing custom software development. And what we started realizing was that with every software that we were building or managing, there was always that payment piece that came into play.
Yeah,
and more often than not, that was one of the more complicated pieces to implement. And we realized that the options out there, the older gateways or the older platforms weren't always easy to connect to and to integrate with, and they were very slow on implementing certain features or solutions that would enable softwares to really put that payment space in. And the more we thought about it and spoke about it, the more we realized that there's a real void in the market for payment platform, and specifically in the B2B and business to government industries. That's where it seems to be like, the largest void and the biggest,
Sure.
the biggest space for us to come in. So, we set about building Accept.Blue. It took us a couple of years, but we finally reached the point where we were confident enough to sell. 2020 was actually our first full year of sales. So, it's probably
Baptism by fire.
exactly. It was like if there was any year to launch, it was going to be 2020, right? But it's
Right.
been a good year. A lot of businesses, especially card present businesses, had a really hard time. But thankfully, because we're mostly focused on card not present,
Right.
the hit wasn't as hard. We were able to really get our product out there and start sales. Yeah. So in a nutshell, that's pretty much Accept.Blue.
I have a quick question, if you don't mind, Ben. The
Sure.
name, Accept.Blue. What is there a significance there? I mean, I have to admit, when I first saw it, it was like, I wonder if this is Amex. I don't know why. I just,
No, their
Right.
colors are blue. It's
their
yeah.
colors are blue, right? Yeah. So
For sure, right? So actually, you're not the first one to say, wait, so you guys are part of American Express or not? I mean, it is
Right.
a little bit confusing. There really isn't that much, depth to the name. It's more of accept, meaning we're accepting payments, we're allowing, payments to be accepted. Software company that we were working with in the past was Code Blue, so we sort of like broke off of that and used the words Accept.Blue. But
Okay.
yeah, there's not much of a,
Oh, I see.
philosophical
so-
story behind it.
Yeah.
definitely not aligned with Amex, though. Okay.
That's right.
It'll make it a little easier for you guys if someday you get acquired by Amex, and then you're all set. So, they'll be
Yeah,
like, they don't even
right?
change the name. So,
Right.
awesome. One other follow up to that too. I had, I kind of compare you guys in some ways to Stripe. I don't know if that's an accurate comparison, but just as far as your go to market, I know you guys have a lot of other things with the optimization and all of that. But how do you, Stripe is obviously like the enemy of our industry in a lot of ways. When I say our industry, I mean the direct merchant sales organizations. How do you compare yourself when you look at somebody like a Stripe? Obviously, they've been around a long time, but do you feel like you're kind of solving some similar problems in terms of ISV integration and stuff?
So I'm really happy you asked that question. One of the mottos we have with our development team when it comes to the API is simpler than Stripe. That's like been sort of our slogan.
I kind of figured that. I
Yeah,
could tell.
so
I could tell just by seeing what you guys were doing. It's like a lot of the bigger gateways in our industry that are fantastic, and I love them, but they're not quite there. The API side. I mean, if I'm a developer by background as well, and so like when you actually integrate with Stripe and then you integrate with somebody else, you're like, wow. I mean, they're getting better, but man, there's definitely a gap there for sure. It's harder.
For sure. And we focus on the virtual terminal, our core product, but at the same time, we place an immense focus on the API because we know that that's where the future is, right? At the end of the day, if you don't have a clean, simple, open API, you're not set for tomorrow, right?
Right.
And another thing we did was that our product is a fully white labeled product, which means every ISO gets the product branded to them. So we branded the API as well. So if you're an ISO Accept.Blue, your API documentation is actually branded to your company because we want API to be a really a leveraged part of our solution.
That's really cool. I didn't know that you actually white label the API. It's pretty sweet. So yeah, I think that's an interesting way to, a lot of people are like, well, there's so many gateways. Where does Accept.Blue fit into the ecosystem? And at least for me, when I talk about you guys with ISOs, it's like, well, if you have a software company that's saying we want to use Stripe because it's so simple that even though we're not making any rev share, it's worth it because of the savings on developer time. I think that's kind of the Accept.Blue spot. So anyway, let's dive into our topic today. So I really like this. I was excited to see that you guys had done these integrations. So let's start by just kind of giving us a little bit of scope. So Salesforce and NetSuite, these are like humongous companies, but our industry may not be as familiar with them as you and I are, Ben. So can you give us a little concept of this opportunity of merchants and businesses that work with Salesforce? Do you have any numbers, any stats? Give us a little bit of information about those companies.
For sure. So NetSuite is an enterprise resource planning software, or better known as an ERP software. And Salesforce is a customer relation management or CRM software. And, really simply what these are softwares that larger companies or organizations rely on to run their business, right? Different industries use different softwares. Salesforce is used a lot by the nonprofit world, but for the most part, the common denominator here is that if you're a larger organization or a large business and there's too many pieces, there's too many pieces going around your company, you have the software that sort of enables you to manage everything from one portal, from one admin, and makes life a lot easier for these organizations. So because these are primarily much larger companies that are using these softwares, and we're talking about a minimum of 100,000 a month, and sometimes it's millions of dollars a month in processing. This is obviously the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow for ISOs and agents. And the thing with these companies is that they both are really incredible pieces of software, but when it comes to payments, they rely on another party being integrated to the software to allow these businesses to process payments within this software. And that's where Accept.Blue comes into the picture, where we created these plugins that allows businesses and organizations that are using these softwares to process payments within these softwares. So everything is really in one place.
Yeah. So you talked about the size of these organizations being larger. And I know, and of course, I mean, Salesforce, there's individuals that use Salesforce.
Right.
But I think to your point, as far as payment integrations, the bigger companies is where a lot of the opportunity is. Talk about the type a little bit. You mentioned nonprofit with Salesforce. Do these companies tend to be towards maybe card not present, or is there anything there? Or is it just kind of like, if you're large, you might use Salesforce? I mean, does it matter about the type?
Right. So, there are both card not present and card present organizations that use these softwares. But primarily, I would say the overwhelming majority would be card not present, because for the most part, we're talking about, let's say with NetSuite, there are 40,000 companies that use NetSuite today. And for the most part, we're talking about actually 150,000 that use Salesforce. So we're talking about a lot of these are really, really big.
There's like 200,000 companies that are using one of these two platforms.
Yeah, that's 200,000 opportunities, for ISOs out there.
So, and I'm sorry to cut you off there, but okay, so we have these 200,000 companies. I want to talk about this word native for a second. So these are native integrations. So explain to us, if I'm a large company and I want to accept payments and I'm using a different gateway that's not native, what does that mean? Why is that different from the native integration that Accept.Blue has done?
Great question. So when it comes to the word native, I like to say there's two parts to the native, to the nativity of this integration. And one is that payments are actually taking place within NetSuite or within Salesforce. So with a non-native integration, what you might see is a sort of a pop-up window that appears, when the business is trying to process payments, or a redirect to a different page or a different website where they might have the information, transferred over, but at the same time, we're talking about another party coming into play over here. Because it's not happening actually within the NetSuite or Salesforce software. While with Accept.Blue, there's no pop-ups, there's no redirects, there's no links to it, there's nothing. It's actually built in as part of the NetSuite account. So you have, your safeguards and your customers and the ability to just process payments with the click of a button. So that's part one of native. Part two, which is equally as important, is the fact that we allow the ISO to handle the relationship. So, with some other native payment plugins out there, what happens is that the gateway will say, we need to deal with the merchants directly. We don't want the ISO coming in because, these softwares could very often get complicated and with specific customizations and things like that. And they say, we don't need you, the ISO in the picture, or the agent in the picture. We'll just talk to the merchant. But with Accept.Blue, because it's our proprietary gateway and we service ISOs, that's who we service. We're more than happy for the ISO to handle the relationship. And as James and Patti, both of you know that ISOs, it's so important for them to handle the relationship, for them to stay in the picture at all times.
Sure.
Yeah, I like that. It's really interesting too, because I know exactly what you mean about this native thing. It is very jarring. When, and like even stuff like just making sure the data is there. I've seen integrations where you're like, accept a payment, it takes you to another gateway landing page. Basically, the customer makes the payment, they click and it's approved. And many times it leaves you on that other screen and says payment approved. And it's like, okay,
where do I go from here?
So now you go back to your other tab and nothing changed. So what do you do?
Yeah.
Do you then have to make a checkbox that says it was paid? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Whereas what you guys are doing, if I'm understanding it correctly, it would be like within Salesforce, it says payment accepted, and here's the date it was accepted. Here's the transaction information. And so it's like all there in that system. And that's really important, because when you get a customer that calls in and says, hey, I made a, my account says I'm in arrears in payments, but I actually made a payment last month, and your customer service person actually goes and looks at it, they don't really know if you did. They then have to go back into the gateway, try to find this transaction, see the date on it, see if it matches the invoice number. And, it's like, it gets very, very confusing. So I think, having it native is just really, really crucial. And so let's talk about Salesforce for just a second. So I used Salesforce for my company a long time ago, and I had an ISO of my own that was pretty large. And I'm not a huge Salesforce fan, but I understand why larger organizations use it. It does pull things together. So let's get a little more specific. Let's talk about a card not present merchant that's invoicing, customers. Okay. So maybe they're doing large ticket and they're invoicing, maybe it's a B2B type client. They're invoicing their customers. What does that transaction flow look like inside of Salesforce if they use the Accept.Blue integration?
Right. So when it comes to Salesforce, you mentioned an example of sending out an invoice. A lot of people that use Salesforce are relying on recurring payments.
Yes.
I mentioned, nonprofits, that have donors that have just, recurring payments. For a nonprofit. Someone who sets up a recurring payment is the absolute best, right? Because they're not, the payments are just coming in month after month or week after week. So, the process would be pretty simple of selecting a customer, adding a card, saving a card to that customer's profile, and that card is tokenized because it's going through the gateway, and we rely on tokenization. And then just setting up that, that recurring payment to just run automatically. And that would update Salesforce in real time and the gateway, the virtual terminal, the reporting in the gateway. At the same time, these two softwares would be talking to each other, are completely synced. And the same thing happens, with sending out an invoice and the customer paying. Everything would be appearing both in Salesforce and at the gateway in real time, and keeping everything updated.
In real time and simultaneously, right? It's not like there's a lag between. Gotcha.
Yeah. Okay. So let's pivot to NetSuite. So maybe a good example here would be more of the invoicing, I would think, with NetSuite. Let's talk about merchants specifically that maybe do level 3 processing, which we haven't talked a lot about on this podcast. We've covered a few things here and there about optimization, but let's say we have a government contractor. So as an example, I used to have a client that was really large, and their job was they fixed all of the mail trucks. So all the trucks that, deliver the mail and things like that, they would go to this kind of regional auto repair place. And so this place was billing the government, and the government was paying with government issued credit cards. Okay. So let's say that example, let's say that merchant is using NetSuite. Can you give us a little flavor of how that would work as far as how they'd be collecting money and potentially this level 3 data that they need?
For sure. So I'm really happy you brought up, level 3, you guys are the expert on level 3, and a big part of Accept.Blue is interchange optimization, and the fact that we automate the level 3. So again, we weren't trying to really change anything with the NetSuite or Salesforce for that matter. We're just trying to enable them to accept payments. So an example would be a merchant creates a sales order, which is considered an authorization. Again, they would have customers saved and filed with saved cards, and they would, process the payments, either a sales order or a cash sale. And then when it comes to level 3, that actually takes place completely on the back end. So the merchant is not faced with any additional data fields that they have to input. They're just putting in the credit card number and the zip, and processing that payment. And then on the back end, what Accept.Blue is doing is sending all that additional data, to the processor. So it's really, any software that's going to leverage Accept.Blue's API, be it NetSuite, Salesforce, QuickBooks, whatever it is. One of the major benefits is that these transactions, if they're qualifying transactions, and in your scenario, that would be a prime example of a business that would, qualify a lot for interchange optimization. This is all happening on the back end without the merchant having to do any, additional work or putting in any additional information.
So that additional information basically is being populated from NetSuite, from what's already on NetSuite. Is that what you're saying?
So we take whatever information we have on NetSuite, whatever information is provided, we'll grab that. whatever's missing, we'll provide on the back end, default information or template information as the ISO set up this merchant. But
Right.
yeah,
Gotcha.
we're going to combine this information to create this complete set of level
Sure.
2 and 3 data and send that off with the transaction. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball question, and it's fine if, I know you're probably not the in-house expert on level 3 and all that. So, this may be outside of the wheelhouse, but I'm just kind of curious. So with level 3, there's a lot of data that's required. And it's pretty specific data, and it's data that's required by the government in order to, process transactions and then to be able to get this lower rate by the card brands. When you say you're pre-populating, I'm just curious, how do you decide how far to push that envelope? Ultimately, you don't want to provide, bogus information, for lack of a better word. It does need to be legit. So any thoughts on that, is just kind of in general of how far you push that envelope to make it like this quote unquote fully automated versus actually getting the data from the merchant?
So, James, I get this question probably on a daily basis at this point.
We're good. So you're ready to answer it.
Level 3,
So the answer, right? You don't have to search for it.
Right. So let me tell you a little bit of how Accept.Blue does interchange optimization, and it might be a little bit different than some other platforms out there. So when an ISO boards a merchant to the gateway, there's going to be a tab level 3, and what we're going to do is we're going to ask the ISO for some industry specific level 2 and 3 data. Besides for, let's say, a tax rate based on the merchant's locality, but we're going to tell the ISO, we're going to recommend of the ISO to ask the merchant for a set of information that's relevant to this merchant. So let's take an example. Let's take let's take a simple example, a plumber, right? They have one product. They have many products that they sell, right? But they can for sure provide SKU, a product reference number, description, a name, a commodity code for at least one of their products, right? They could probably do for many of the products, but we just ask them, get one set of information from this merchant and plug it into this merchant's profile. And now it's not just sort of dummy data that's just being sent the same for every merchant across this ISO's portfolio. Instead, we're actually getting industry-specific level 2 and 3 data that becomes the template for this merchant's transactions. And we're going to take that, and obviously there's going to be some default information that we're going to provide on the back end. And a lot of it, is really sort of, it could be defaulted, but whatever could be specific to this merchant's business, to this merchant's industry, we give the ISO the ability to actually set that information as part of this merchant's profile so that we could take this fully specific, industry-specific template and send it along with every transaction. So, to answer your question, yes, some of it is, default data that, technically could be sent across all merchants, but we do try to have level 2 and 3 data be specific to each merchant's, file.
Yeah, I think to me, it's a really interesting debate. I was talking to another company about it recently, and we were just debating. And I think it will be interesting to see how that develops from the issuing. Obviously the issuing banks hate this. This is now very, it's not like you guys are the first to try to automate. I think you're pushing the envelope further, and I love what you're doing of setting up the profiles and trying to make it as specific as you can. I will be very interested to see. It's like you guys are absolutely playing by the existing rules. I wonder if 2 years from now those rules will change. I really do. These issuing banks are losing millions of dollars a day as a result of companies like yours. And I think it's great. I love it. I think they should lose millions of dollars a day because these merchants deserve to get lower rates. But at the same time, I wonder if they're eventually going to come back and say, this has got to be actual legit. But I think even in that case, you guys have an advantage because having your NetSuite integration, that is where that data is going to live for these companies. And yeah. So, so I think it's super interesting. Okay. So let's shift gears a little bit. I think our audience has at least a cursory understanding of this, native integration. And so I think that's interesting. Is there anything you would add to this before we dive into kind of more of the sales side a little bit? Is there anything that you would add in that you feel like the NetSuite and Salesforce integrations, is there anything about them that sets them apart from other companies that have tried to integrate that you find is a real advantage to these business clients? Anything else you kind of want to add to that?
And perhaps maybe what the difference between each of them, if there's any distinctiveness that sets them apart from each other. It seems not to, but I'm just going to throw that out there.
Right. So, sure. So, NetSuite is primarily used by manufacturers, wholesalers,
Okay.
businesses like that. Whereas Salesforce could be used by organizations that talk directly to customers and not necessarily business to business. They could be a B2C company as well, and even private individuals, like you mentioned. So NetSuite is going to be used by you'll almost never ever find a small company using NetSuite. I mean, that would be that would be very rare, and it's not so the case with Salesforce. So there are certain differences, but the key thing that I think about both of these softwares and why I think it's such a valuable plugin and such a big deal for ISOs out there is because when you get such a client, when you get a NetSuite client, we're talking about a volume of transactions that is easily the size of 4 or 5 smaller smaller merchants, and sort of the smaller merchants are the low-hanging fruit, and it might be tempting to run after them. And there's nothing wrong with running after the nail salon down the block. I'm not saying those aren't good merchants, but if you sort of focus on the larger merchants, I think there's so many benefits. And besides the actual profits that are available with these larger merchants, I think there's one other point, and that's stickiness, right?
Right.
When you sign up this nail salon, down the block, all it takes is another agent with a couple of basis points off to come and say, listen, switch to me. I'll give you the same service with a little bit of a lower rate. And that happens. There's probably statistics on the retention rate with with merchants, smaller merchants, but I'm pretty convinced that with these larger merchants, it doesn't really work like that. To get them to switch their payment partner is a big deal, and they're not going to do it so fast. So if you can come there and tell them, listen, we're going to give you payment processing within the software that you use at a good rate with Interchange Optimization, you can be pretty assured that this is a relationship that's going to stay for a long time, and it's going to take a lot, to shake that partnership.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Do you have any ideas, Ben, about what advice you might give to ISOs who want to target any of these businesses? Are there specific places where they can go, or other ideas that they can leverage to start building a book of business in this space? I mean, because it seems, as you say, it's extremely lucrative. If I was out there, I'd be jotting down this stuff right now and going for it. But where would they go?
Right. So that's a great question, and one I've been getting ever since we rolled out this integration. How do I get these merchants? Right. I get the opportunity. How do we actually get them?
Yeah.
And the truth is there isn't some secret website that's going to list all these NetSuite companies or anything like that.
Right.
But what I do tell these ISOs is that it's all in how you set yourself up. Who you're going to be targeting. Your mindset. I was talking to a certain ISO, and the ISO mentioned that what they've just done was sort of take off commissions or roll back commissions on any businesses that are processing less than $100,000 a month. And I'm not saying that's good advice for every ISO office, but the point is we're gonna pivot these agents to really focus on these larger merchants. And when you start looking for them, you will find them. When you start focusing on larger opportunities on manufacturers and wholesalers, then instead of noticing the small shop down the block, you start noticing the factory a couple of blocks away, and this larger corporation a few miles out of your city, and that's where your focus starts to be, and eventually you definitely will hit these companies that are using NetSuite and Salesforce,
Right.
and you can come to them and tell them, listen, I've got the complete solution for you.
I would also think that, office buildings. I was talking to a friend the other day, and he was explaining how he was in a building that was 17 floors, right? He's a stockbroker, but there's all these types of big, or at least mid-sized businesses, mid-sized to larger businesses. I would think that would be, just in my mind, it'd be like, hey, let's go to a couple of these buildings and start looking at the directory and see.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
Well, you know what, Ben, I'll give our audience an idea right now of exactly how you could target them. So I know exactly what I would do if I still had an ISO and I partnered with you guys and wanted to go after these NetSuite merchants. The beauty of our economy today is social media. These companies may not have published a list but it's the same thing. And so what I would do is I would write a short little ebook or a short little guide of, optimize payments with NetSuite would be the title. Create your ebook, create your graphic, go to the Facebook advertising platform and run an ad for that as a free download where you get name, email, phone number. And in the interest section, just put the word NetSuite. And what that's going to do is that's going to target anybody on Facebook that has liked the NetSuite page, has interacted with NetSuite, has talked about NetSuite. And so Facebook is very good at that. Even, have they visited the NetSuite website? Because I guarantee you NetSuite is using Facebook pixels. And so the great thing about it is these companies, these social media companies make it super, super easy. So if you want to make $100,000 a year extra in the next 6 months, take that idea I just gave you, and the first one that runs with it is going to make a ton of money. So, I think there's absolutely ways to target these businesses. Another really interesting one would be Salesforce would be really the exact same thing. Salesforce does an amazing job of getting their clients to engage with them on social media. That is one of their hallmarks. So leverage that to your advantage. Go to these different platforms and say, run an ad on, how to optimize payments with Salesforce or enterprise payment solutions for Salesforce, the key, 3 keys to enterprise, whatever. And so come up with a sexy title, get a good graphic designer from, Upwork.com or something, and make a cool little ad, a free download or something. And man, you could absolutely just kill it in this space. So so I love what you guys are doing. So Ben, let's close it out with this. I know we could keep talking for a long time. I'd love to talk to you more about level 3. We'll have to do another episode at some point about that. But tell us about where people could go to learn more. I'm sure we'll have a lot of ISOs and agents that are interested in partnering with Accept.Blue. So where would you send them to learn more?
Sure. So our website is always a great first step. It's Accept.Blue. There's no .com. That's a common mistake. It's just Accept.Blue. You can fill out the the contact form there, and we respond usually within a couple of hours to every information request. Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Well, that explains it, because I tried to do Accept.Blue.com and got some very strange site.
Yeah, I don't think we were thinking of that when we actually, decided on Accept.Blue.
You thought Accept.Blue would be so cool. Everybody would remember.
Right. Sure.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I made that mistake with, I can't remember what it was, some business I had a while back, and eventually everybody figures it out, but it takes a little while to get it across. So Ben, thank you so much for your time today, the information, the insights. I know for sure a lot of people in our audience are already salivating over some of these things and are going to be reaching out to you guys, and hope you guys get a big bump from it. So thanks again for taking the time and sharing the info with us.
Yeah, thanks again. Yeah, thanks a lot, Ben. I actually learned a lot from this. Thank you.
That's cool. It's been a real pleasure, both James and Patti, to be here. I'm, really excited to have been able to convey so much valuable information. Like I said, I think you guys are doing a great job, educating ISOs and agents out there. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So Patti, I did a questions from the field probably 2 months ago about sales tax and cash discounting. Mm-hmm. If you remember that.
Right, I remember. Mm-hmm.
One of the most confusing ones I've ever done, I think.
Exactly.
I realized it was confusing content, so I followed it up with a very detailed ebook, and I wrote this ebook in conjunction with Valor Paytech, our sponsor on the podcast.
Right.
Well, I bring this up because I thought it was pretty cool. Valor actually built out this feature now. And when you're using Valor, you can actually decide on a merchant by merchant basis, do you want the sales tax to calculate before or after the non-cash adjustment is applied?
Wow, now that's very cool.
It is. Yeah. So they really took kind of the spirit of the ebook. They were already actually working on it. And then I worked in conjunction with them to make the ebook, and now it's live. So if you read that ebook and you're like, wait a second, you got it, and you're like, I am selling larger merchants, I'm doing this the wrong way. Just understand our sponsor, Valor Paytech, has actually created the technology for you now. Because when I wrote the ebook, it actually didn't exist. I wrote the ebook, then I reached out to Valor, and they're like, oh, we're already working on that. I'm like, oh, that's amazing. So then I did it in conjunction with them. But when I wrote the ebook, the technology actually did not exist to do what I was advising people to do. There was now it does. Yeah. And there was like ISOs and agents I worked with that were doing like custom integration and custom coding for it. But now just do Valor Paytech. So again, if you want a demo of how that works about the sales tax side, go to ccsalespro.com/Valor, VALOR, ccsalespro.com/Valor, VALOR, and get a free demo.
And I think this is just so instructive, of how Valor is approaching the industry. I mean, there's a problem. They try to address it. And so Again, folks, if you haven't already, go check out ccsalespro.com/VALOR.
And now, here is questions from the field with James Shepard.
So, Patti, last week I was talking about how I've been creating this new merchant sales mastery training program.
Right.
And, I've been talking, last week I talked about beliefs, and today I want to talk about barriers. And this is another really interesting one as I have conversations with a lot of ISOs and agents in the industry. I'm amazed at how many of these companies and individuals have put up barriers where they will not do certain things in the payment space because they have decided that those things are morally wrong and that the things that they do are morally right.
Such as what? What do you mean in terms of like the product is morally wrong or the?
I'll give you so let's take leasing as an example. This is
Okay.
this is the most controversial.
I see where you're going. Go for it.
Okay. So let's take leasing a terminal. Okay.
Right.
Is leasing a terminal morally wrong? Well, the answer is it depends. Okay.
Yeah.
All of the things I'm going to tell you today, the answer is it depends. Am I leasing a $4,000 point of sale system to someone because it's better for their cash flow to pay for this device over time?
Right.
Well, I don't think any of our audience would say, "Oh, that's terrible. You should never do that."
Sure.
Well, no, that's fine. Like I'm trying to spread the investment out, right? Now, if I'm leasing a Verifone standalone terminal for $169 a month times 60 months. Well, now there's a little bit of profiteering going on there.
That's yeah, exactly.
Okay. So
which is how it was in the old days.
Exactly. Yes.
Right.
Now, here's what I would say. I'm going to give you a list of, I don't know, what do I got here? I don't know. I'll give you 5 or 6 of them here, but I'm going to give you 5 or 6 of these hot topic issues. And here's what I want to encourage you to do as you're listening to this. Be aware of your initial response. When I said leasing a terminal, what did you think in your head? You either thought, well, yeah, that's what I do. I lease terminals all the time and I make a ton of money on that. Or you thought these people that lease terminals are evil and horrible and terrible. And I just think they should be out of the industry. That's what you thought. Your brain went to one of those 2 places. Let me challenge you to go somewhere in the middle. Okay.
I'm always big on the middle ground. Go ahead.
Yeah. So understand leasing terminals is a building block. It is it's a Lego piece. My son has he has this huge bag of Legos.
Sure.
We dump it on the floor and there are just all these random Lego pieces and we can take those pieces and build things. Now, if I said to my son, now Donnie, you see these little 1-block Lego pieces, those are bad. We don't use those. And we don't use the red ones either.
Right.
And we also don't use the wheels because I think wheels are just stupid to have in a Lego box. So we're going to take out all the wheels, all the individual blocks and all the red ones. And we're going to put those in a pile. That's the naughty pile. We don't use that pile. Now let's build
he's going to say, Dad, I don't like this game.
Right. And then I'm going to say, Donnie, build me a red car.
Oh, yeah.
Well, what's going to happen? And it's funny. It sounds so stupid, but Patti, I get on these calls with these agents all the time and they're like, now, James, I would never lease a terminal. I would never do a long-term contract. I would never do a price increase. I would never sell a small merchant. Help me build a profitable portfolio. And I'm like, You want me to help you build a red car without any wheels? Like what? No, like there are building blocks. You can use each of these things correctly, or you can use them incorrectly, right? You can use them for some merchants where they make sense. You can use them for others where they don't. In a similar vein, Patti, I've had agents come to me and say, James, I want to sell big merchant accounts. I'm like, okay. And they're like, now here's the thing. I always provide free equipment. I never do long-term contracts. So what's the right plan? And I'm like, the right plan is to not sell large merchants because you're going to suck at it. So stop this idea of this evil pile and this morally high ground pile of stuff. Like, no, these are just options. Okay.
Right.
Can you use them incorrectly? Yes. Are there certain branding strategies that would rely on making some of them seem evil? Yes. And I am 100% on board with that, right? I know companies that go to market with we always provide the equipment for free, and that's your branding position. And I think that's fantastic as long as you're targeting merchants where it's going to make sense to provide them with free terminals and you're understanding that you're not going to be able to sell a 40 location restaurant.
Right.
If they need new equipment because they're going to need
that's a lot of
$200,000 worth of equipment. Right. So So you have to make sure that you're putting these building blocks together to accomplish your objectives. What I find people doing is they're making their strategies backwards, and they're saying, well, here's all the things I'm willing to do, and here's all the things I'm not willing to do. Now let me make a strategy. No, make a strategy, make an objective first. Then say, okay, I want to sell this type of merchant in this, I want to sell them this service. Then say, okay, what are the building blocks that I need in order to accomplish that objective?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So I'm going to run through this list real quick. I'm not going to have time to talk about it too much, but these are some of the things I find that are big barriers. And again, stay tuned. In about a month or so, you'll see the Merchant Sales Mastery course that spends about 2 hours on this. So cold calling. Okay. Cold calling. I know tons of reps. I do referral. I never cold call. Really? Okay. What happens when one of your people that's one of your partners, maybe you get the Chamber of Commerce and they say, here's a list of all of our members. Well, I don't cold call. You're an idiot.
Right.
Okay. Cold call that list. Right.
Of course.
But you'd be surprised how many reps is like, well, I don't do that. I don't cold call. Well, you're going to lose a ton of money then. That's a bad trade. That's stupid. Okay. So I don't cold call. I would never walk into a business. I don't do that. I don't do walk-ins. Okay. Well, what if you're doing a LinkedIn strategy where you're identifying high potential executives, and these executives, where their office is, and you're trying to sell larger organizations, and you are going to be in that area. And if you were open to the concept of walking in, you could walk in and say, hey, I just happen to be in the area. I want to drop my business card off for Tony. Is he around today? And Tony would see you because nobody ever walks into that office. But because your brain is shut off to, I would never go out in the field and walk into a business, then you can't have that opportunity. Right. So you don't shut your mind off to it. Social media prospecting, right? When I talk about social media prospecting, there's always the two extremes. I just use social media. It's so magical. No, it's not. Or I never use social media. I just walk in and cold call, right? Well, what if those of you that walked in and cold call also got email addresses and connected with people on LinkedIn?
Right.
What if those of you that are all social media that have all this data on local businesses, what if you took that data and used it to walk in and start a warm conversation, right? So you don't close these ideas off. I talked about equipment leasing, purchase, rental, like all three of those, they have their place. Long-term contracts, month-to-month contracts, price increases. I know agents that are like, and again, you say, well, James, my whole brand is built around, I never increase your price. Well, that's fine. I'm not saying that's bad, but what I'm saying is then don't think in your mind, a price increase is evil.
Right.
No, it's not. If you do a big price increase that nobody knows about and you are not providing additional value, it's wrong. But let me tell you something. Do you realize that merchants, let me talk to those of you that would never do a price increase. Do you realize that when a merchant signs up with you and you get them to say yes initially, do you understand that getting them to say yes to you, it required you to do a very low price points relative to your value because they weren't convinced that you were going to provide exceptional customer service to them.
Right.
But do you understand that after a year of providing amazing customer service to your clients, do you realize that you're worth more? And do you realize that if you took that value and you did a small price increase across the board, that your customers, your merchants would not cancel because they say, well, I know that it was this price initially, but now it's a little more, and that's okay because they've been providing me with a lot more value and I'm still not going to cancel.
Right.
So there's a place for the price increase. Large merchants and small merchants, micro merchants, right? There's reps that are like, I am never going to sell a merchant that has under 5,000 a month. Okay. What about your local chamber that gets 2,000 a month in member fees? You don't want to be the processor for your local chamber because they're under 5,000.
Right.
Like, use your head. There are a lot of businesses out there that do $500 a month. There's a friend of mine I know, and he has a business that's like auctioneering and stuff. And he probably only does $500, maybe $1,000 a month in processing and credit card processing because of just his nature of his business. This guy is connected to everybody in the area. Why?
What a great deal it would be to have him and get the referrals, right?
Exactly. So never do. Then there's agents that are like, I can't call these large businesses. I just don't have that. Well, what if you spent 2 hours a week pursuing large accounts? You might get one or two of them a year, and each of those might produce you $1,000 a month in income.
Right.
So why not go after the Salesforce merchants like we talked about, or
Like we talked about
episode,
with
right?
Ben, right?
So, keeping that in mind, building a sales team, this is the last one I'll mention real quick. There are those that are like, I never want to hire agents. And there are those that are like, the only reason I'm in this is to build a team. Wait a second. It's like, well, James, I have 3 agents, so I don't sell anymore. Okay. How many sales were you making before all by yourself? And they're like 15 a month. How many do all 3 of your sub agents make together? And they're like 12. Okay.
Oh, that's simple math.
And how much of the residual are you giving them that you used to get all of?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, this idea that like, well, you have these agents. No, like you can have your cake and eat it too. You can go out and sell while training your agents. You don't have to give up one income to get another one. Build a new source of income from these agents and these affiliates. So my point with all this is there are these, and I cover a lot more in the training, but there are all of these different things. And what I do in the training is I talk you through understanding these building blocks, or like I call them, the Lego pieces. And the idea is not which of these are you willing to use? The question is, what are you trying to accomplish? And then how can we use these different pieces and how can we put them together to help you build the strategy that you need in order to accomplish your goals and objectives?
Great stuff.
Thanks, Patti.
This is the Insider's Report with Patti Murphy.
So, James, we haven't talked much about cryptocurrencies recently, but there is plenty of news on that front. The big news, I think, is that both Visa and MasterCard are preparing to support settlements using cryptocurrency, and PayPal is in the game as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as far as Visa and MasterCard are concerned, it's not just any cryptocurrency.
Mm-hmm.
Both companies say their initiatives are focused on what's called stable coins. As the name implies, stable coins are less volatile than like the more well-known cryptos like Bitcoin.
Right.
Because the value is pegged to fiat currencies like the US dollar.
Right.
Now, there already are several credit and debit cards that are tied to cryptocurrencies.
Okay.
Some even offer rewards in cryptocurrency. However, when a consumer purchases something using a crypto card, that crypto needs to be converted into a fiat currency in order to complete settlement, which obviously adds costs and complexities to the process.
Right.
Now, Crypto.com is based in Hong Kong, and it issues a Visa prepaid debit card backed by cryptocurrencies, including the stable coin known as US dollar coin, or USDC. In late March, Visa said it had just launched a pilot that allows Crypto.com to settle Visa transactions using USDC. And not surprisingly, Visa execs characterize this as a, quote, major milestone.
Right.
Now, MasterCard also said that it's on a similar path. It made an announcement in February that it's working towards doing something with USDC.
Yeah.
And they're both Visa and MasterCard are also working with the major central banks, providing test platforms for simulations, right? For the central banks are all working on these ideas of what's called central bank digital currencies.
Right. Right.
Now, according to reports I've read, China is the one country closest to launching a national digital currency. Here in the U.S., the Fed is said to be in the exploratory phase of developing a digital dollar.
Right. Right.
Now,
you really, I'm sorry, I have to cut in here because
sure.
I'm so passionate about this subject, not in the way most people are. But this cryptocurrency thing, okay, so let me get this straight. So the reason cryptocurrencies were developed was that we did not want any government entities, large organizations, or anybody else tracking us or having anything to do with our money.
Right.
We need cryptocurrency, right?
Right.
Well, how is it eventually going to take off? When Visa accepts it?
Thank you very much.
When the government comes out with their version of it?
Right.
Like, hello. I mean, come on, people. Seriously. So I think there are big advantages to the idea of blockchain and the technology involved in creating secure transactions across borders.
Right.
I think there's going to be a lot of things like USDC that are for, these are for large organizations that need to exchange a lot of money across borders and things like that. And then they want to settle it in their own currency in their home country. But solving those problems is a very, very, very different value proposition from Bitcoin and from Dogcoin now.
Is there really a dog coin?
Oh, you haven't seen that? Yeah, it's crazy. So,
no, I haven't.
it was like the hottest thing lately. So, here's the thing. I just think it's very important. And I know a lot of people in our audience are going to hate me for this because a lot of you have, you've made, $50,000 by investing in Bitcoin or whatever it is.
Bitcoin or something. Right.
Yeah. And, you're making these investments and, I'm not trying to say that I think that's wrong. I'm happy you're making money.
Make money wherever you can make money. Yeah.
Right. But just make sure while you're doing that, you understand what these things are. So Bitcoin and all these others, they're great because they're not backed by any government, right? Meaning they're worthless in real terms. They're only as valuable as the confidence that exists within the network of their value. And that's okay. But let me explain.
Right.
If the US dollar drops 4% in a day, the US government is going to find a way to prop it up. If I'm literally holding $100 bill, the odds of it being worth less, the odds of its buying power decreasing over 12 months to less than $100, the odds of that happening are actually very, very low. And the reason is that the government is going to do whatever they have to do and play whatever monetary games they have to play with all the resources at their disposal to make sure that the buying power of my $100 bill is
it's still $100,
but it's going to be 97. Like it's going to be close. You have that Bitcoin money, you have that dog coin, whatever it is. Do you understand? Like that is the odds of it being worth what it's worth today, more or less in a year, are unknowable. Absolutely.
And that's the key right there, is it's so unknowable, right?
Yes.
I mean, I had this conversation with my investment advisor the other day, and he was like, I just was, mentioning, hey, what about Coinbase? Should we look at that? And, and we got talking about Bitcoins. And I did years ago, I did a story on Bitcoin. And when I do a story, I like to check something out. So I bought a Bitcoin for $90. Right. It hit $1,000. I took my profit and I left. I mean, I'd forgotten about it until I went back to do another story. It wasn't, but I have friends who have so much invested in these Bitcoins and these other cryptocurrencies. And I'm like, you guys have got to be crazy. I mean,
well, and again, I get, and again, it's
you should just bury your money out in the backyard and hope you remember where you buried it. you know?
Or if you have, we have people on this call that have $1 million in the bank. If you want to take $20, $30, $40, $50,000 and play around Bitcoin or go to the horse track, either one, have fun. I hope you make a ton of money, but just understand that when we're sharing a story about Visa beginning to get into crypto and the government of China creating their own crypto, understand we're not saying that means that Bitcoin, look, it is becoming mainstream. No, it's not. The technology of blockchain is becoming mainstream because it is needed as a means to process transactions securely. The idea of a currency that is like the enemy of every government and that is never going to track you, we have not seen that become mainstream just yet. We've seen investing in it become mainstream, but we haven't seen people actually using it to buy food at a restaurant become mainstream yet. So anyway, I just had to throw that out. That's my little rant.
And that's a good point, because it's also an excellent segue into what I wanted to say next, which is what PayPal is doing.
Okay.
So, here
we go.
And, PayPal is, flinging the metaphorical door wide open to crypto. It's been allowing consumers with PayPal or Venmo wallets to buy, sell, and hold cryptocurrencies in increments as low as $1. And it includes both stable coins and more volatile cryptos like Bitcoin. But they've also announced that folks can use cryptocurrencies in their PayPal wallets to make payments at e-commerce merchants that accept PayPal.
Wow. Well, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's called Checkout with Crypto. It's an option that appears alongside credit and debit cards in the wallets of those who hold cryptocurrencies in their PayPal accounts.
Sure.
Now, this is what I think is interesting. PayPal said, hey, the draw for merchants already keen on cryptocurrencies is that they can accept crypto without additional integrations or fees, and that all transactions are settled in US dollars and converted to the applicable currency.
Right.
But the draw for PayPal, I think, is more money in its coffers, because as I read the news, a crypto payment from PayPal doesn't incur interchange.
Right.
But it doesn't read as though PayPal plans to adjust its merchant fees. And, while crypto fees are high, there's nothing holding back PayPal or any provider for that matter from batching transactions.
Right. Right.
Which is going to shave costs overall. Right. So that's where I think that I found very interesting. Because it's like,
yeah, no, I'm sorry. It's just like, and again, I'm going to go back to it again. What you just described is not in any way a delivery of the value proposition that we were given of Bitcoin.
Right.
The idea that PayPal is going to allow you to use your Bitcoin value for a fee in order to pay a merchant who doesn't want to accept Bitcoin has nothing to do with this idea that we're just going to pay each other and we won't even know who we are. And the business won't even know who I am, but they're going to accept my Bitcoin. No, the business owners don't want to accept Bitcoin. The idea is failing. It is not working. But there are so many people who are investing in Bitcoin who think they're going to be a millionaire by investing $1,000 50 times and get lucky over and over again, that they want a way to spend it. And so you're leveraging the existing payment rails that already are there, to transfer value in a way that is completely opposite from the original value proposition of crypto in order to buy things from a store in a normal way. So, again.
Yeah. And even, and to go back to the earlier point is when we have, if you have governments creating crypto, where's that anonymity? I mean, forget it. You just, to me, the whole thing about Bitcoin is, and I cracked up when I was doing my taxes last year. It was like, have you made any money on cryptos? Well, if I did, you think I'd tell you?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
There's no reporting on that. Why would I even say anything, right?
Oh, it's just so crazy.
But I think it's really interesting that everybody's talking about it. Like I said, I was talking to my investment advisor. He's like, well, I'm telling people they should have 3 or 4% of their portfolios or of their assets
in crypto.
In crypto. I'm like, yeah, 3 or 4%, but don't count me in.
Right. Well, and again, I think
if I had $1 million, yeah.
Right. Well, and again, I think the idea here is, do I think that cryptocurrency is going to be immensely valuable in 10 years? Absolutely. Do I think every small merchant is going to be directly accepting Bitcoin or other types of things like that without going through the traditional rails of Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, the issuing banks, acquiring banks, or PayPal? No,
or Federal
absolutely
Reserve.
not. Exactly. Or just government issued. So, do I think this idea of this wild, wild west currency, look, there's a reason the government is stepping in here and why they're creating their own currencies and why, because they're not going to allow an untrackable currency to gain mass appeal. They're going to come up with their own version that's trackable. Hello. They make money by tracking your money. That's how it works.
Exactly.
So if you think Bitcoin is ready to take on the US government, you're crazy. All they got to do is pass one law and it's done. So I would be very cautious when you say have part of your assets in crypto. Yes, but what does that mean? Well, that could mean investing in startups that are looking to do B2B payments through traditional rails using blockchain, right? That's a crypto investment. If you want to day trade, then you day trade Bitcoin. Why? Because it goes up and down by 30% here and there. It's like, yeah, but if you actually are looking for long-term investments, be very careful.
Yeah, I agree.
So anyway, that's my 2 cents. But Patti, thank you as always. Very interesting info there.
Yeah, thanks, James.
This episode of the Merchant Sales Podcast was brought to you by Valor Paytech, the technology company that is revolutionizing cash discounting and surcharging with innovative features like dual mid support, waive the fee options, and even adding non-cash adjustment charges to tips. Now, all of this is made possible by a variety of technology devices and solutions such as gateways, tabletop point of sale devices, and features like SMS text messaging and e-invoicing, all with cash discounting in mind. Valor Paytech, bold ideas, smart execution. Make sure you head over to ccsalespro.com/valor, VALOR, ccsalespro.com/valor, VALOR. Schedule your free demo today and watch videos and learn more about this amazing technology solution.
Thank you for listening to the Merchant Sales Podcast. Whether you are an industry veteran, processing executive, or just trying to learn about the payment space, we appreciate your time. The Merchant Sales Podcast is a joint production of greensheet.com and ccsalespro.com, and we hope you will tune in next week for more information and tips on building your merchant services business.